New Zealand Rugby has been left blindsided and angry after SANZAR released the draw for the end-of-year Rugby Championship, forcing the All Blacks to spend Christmas in quarantine. The draw sees the All Blacks playing their final test against Australia on the 12th of December in Sydney, ending a week later than the team had initially anticipated. The All Blacks had been hoping the tournament, which also includes South Africa and Argentina, could have included a midweek test and played over 5 weeks instead of 6. Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, told us earlier in the program he's been asked to look at a bubble arrangement that could trim isolation time. But at the moment, the rules for everyone are the same, 14 days. Author and former Wallaby, Peter Fitzsimons, thinks there's still time for things to change. He believes New Zealand Rugby will get its way and have the All Blacks home with their families for Christmas Day. Speaking to Checkpoint reporter Nick Trubridge a short time ago, Fitzsimons says the All Blacks are used to holding sway.
The heart of this competition is the All Blacks. And if what the All Blacks want, it's not everything that the All Blacks want they get, but when they pound the table shakes.
What would it do to the competition if, say, the draw did stay the same, and let's say we have some of the marquee All Blacks saying, well, the isolation rules haven't looked like they're going to budge and that's not acceptable to us? What would that do to the competition?
You undercut the whole story. I can tell you a Jonah Lomu story that you will recall in 1995 when Jonah Lomu burst onto the international stage. None of us had ever seen anything like him, and there was a brilliant piece written about him in the Sydney Morning Herald. Matter of fact, I wrote it, where I described Lomu as a freight train in ballet shoes. One person that was watching this, when rugby went professional, there was a huge fight between Rupert Murdoch and Kerry Packer, the two media magnates, as to who would own professional rugby. Murdoch in London saw that game played by Lomu in the semi-final against England, where he got the ball on 7 occasions. He scored 4 tries, set up 2 tries and put one Pommy in hospital. And Rupert Murdoch said, I have to have that player. Basically, he said to his people, I don't care what it costs. I don't care how we go about this. I need to have that player on my books. That dictum still applies, that when you can't have a half-assed All Black team. You've got to have a whole lot of them. So if players were to drop out because of it, you just undercut the whole competition. You undercut the value of the win, the victory, or the match. You cut away at the TV audience. You can't do that. The administrators have to make sure you have a full deck All Black team on the paddock, not simply 15 men wearing black jerseys.
Our reporter Nick Trubridge talking to former Wallaby Peter Fitzsimons. And joining me now is Sydney Morning Herald rugby writer Tom Decent. Hi Tom, you seem like the right person to ask this next question. Is it decent to have the All Blacks stuck in isolation and quarantine at Christmas?
Oh, look, it's absolutely not. I mean, let's just get it straight that no one, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, SANZAR want that situation to happen. I mean, when New Zealand were probably going to be hosting the Rugby Championship, Australia were worried about that being the case for its players, and totally understandable that New Zealand are as well. So it's a situation that no one wants to see, but there's a lot to probably play out at the moment. The ball, I guess, is probably most in New Zealand Rugby's court by way of speaking to the government and trying to work out some provisions there by way of maybe even doing a hard lockdown in Australia and then doing a week back in New Zealand so then they could be with their families over Christmas. There's even talk of maybe trying to do the isolation in New Zealand in their home, so if they did have to go across to Christmas time, they could do so. But, look, it's not a situation that anybody wants. And there's a lot of factors at play in this, in what's transpired today.
Yeah, well, let's talk about those factors. Have the All Blacks and New Zealand Rugby annoyed someone?
Look, I mean, possibly. There's clear implication that Australian rugby is behind it, but it's not necessarily the case as well. The obvious issue is having 6 games in 5 weeks, which is clearly not something that everyone is on board with. I know Argentina and South Africa have actually said that they don't want to do that. They've barely been playing any rugby for that matter, and that they would prefer to have the 6 weeks stint and play 6 games over that period for player welfare reasons. SANZAR boss Andy Manaros has talked about that at length today. So they feel that the only way to squeeze that 6-week block in is to play that final game on December 12th, which currently at the moment, obviously, New Zealand are not happy about. the other factor too is broadcasters. Now, there's massive dollars being thrown around. All four unions need this money into their coffers to pay for their players, pay for everything that goes with the game. And broadcasters have said unanimously they would like 6 Saturday games across 6 weeks. And ideally, at the moment, that lands with a December 12th finish. So you would imagine the easiest solution is for an agreement with the New Zealand government to have their players either relax those quarantine restrictions or some other agreement. Otherwise, and there's all sorts of theories as to why New Zealand Rugby has taken this path today.
But is there some niggle or bad blood there between Australian rugby and New Zealand rugby that may be contributing to this impasse?
I think New Zealand Rugby are very upset that they didn't get the Rugby Championship. It had been it was theirs to lose, and they lost it by way of the quarantine restrictions imposed by the New Zealand government. Clearly, they were an issue, and that's why SANZAR awarded it to Australia. Look, Australia were pretty happy about it, and they were happy to trumpet that it was a win. And now they have a 6-week tournament here in Australia that everyone will love over here. And, understandably, New Zealand Rugby fans were livid when that happened. And that flowed on to New Zealand Rugby, clearly not too thrilled about that. Is there a rift? I think Australia were upset today at the assertion that that New Zealand Rugby had allowed or agreed to a 5-week competition when they were going to be hosting the Rugby Championship. I mean, Rob Clark, the Rugby Australia boss, came out in a statement just saying that for absolute clarity on 2 formal occasions, Rugby Australia was supportive of altering the draw so that it could be played over 5 weeks, and both occasions that was, rejected. So the implication being that New Zealand rejected that. Now, Australia actually said, when New Zealand came to Australia and said, we would like a 5-week tournament, Australia actually said yes, we would be more than happy to accommodate that. But what's being lost in this debate is that the fact that Argentina and South Africa actually said no, and SANZAR over the top, being the joint venture, decided that was probably not the way they wanted to go. So, look, I mean, probably beneath the surface there is a bit of animosity between Australia and New Zealand, and it also stems from the issue around Bledisloe fixturing as well. I know Australia said they wouldn't come over for Bledisloe's games, and they managed to get better quarantine restrictions there. So there's heaps at play, but it's definitely I don't know if we would say bad blood, but it definitely is not the best spirit at the moment between the two countries.
I know the suggestion is that in some way the All Blacks should be getting some concessions here in terms of quarantine and isolation, but our rules are pretty tight. So what are the prospects that the ABs will just walk away from the last game or just threaten a boycott and follow through?
I mean, they would, but that would also have ramifications for broadcasters. And if New Zealand Rugby were to do that, they would be in breach of contractual obligations. And then, therefore, that's a significant amount of money as well. It would be pretty tough on them to ask Australia to come over and play the 2 games in New Zealand, and then when the shoe's on the other foot, say, no, we're not going to do it. Interestingly, when Australia were in the same situation when they wanted to play the Rugby Championship in New Zealand, Australia said, hey, look, we don't want our guys in hotel isolation when they get back to Australia. What can we do about that? And New Zealand said, bad luck, not our problem. Talk to your government and we'll deal with it then. Shoe is on the other foot right now, and ironically, New Zealand are kicking up a stink. So there's definitely some rugby administrators in Australia who are laughing about that now. Not laughing, but notice how once New Zealand had lost the Rugby Championship and realised, hey, we may have players in hotel quarantine for Christmas, that they've changed their tune slightly. And we know the New Zealand government are very strict with their protocols, and Australian rugby has had to work hard with our government to try and loosen those restrictions as well. So if I was a betting man, I would say that New Zealand government would come to the party. And we have to remember this is 3 months away as well. A lot can change in that time as well.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Tom Decent, Sydney Morning Herald rugby writer there.